There is a moment that most people never reach, not because it is hidden from them, not because they lack the intelligence or the dedication or the spiritual development to arrive at it, but because everything they have ever been taught about growth, about change, about becoming a better version of themselves, has been quietly and systematically pointing them in exactly the wrong direction. And today, I want to show you what that direction is, why it has been keeping you from the one shift that actually changes everything, and what becomes available the moment you stop doing the thing that feels most natural and start doing the thing that feels, at first, almost counterintuitive, almost like giving up, almost like surrender, but is not surrender at all. It is something closer to the opposite of surrender. It is the most powerful act a human consciousness can perform. But before I tell you what that act is, I need to tell you about a man who spent 11 years of his life trying to build something that kept collapsing, and about what he finally understood on a Tuesday afternoon in a coffee shop in Portland that he had never been able to see in 11 years of effort. His name is not important. What is important is that you will recognize him, because the specific shape of what he was doing wrong is the same shape that most people's deepest frustration takes, regardless of whether it shows up in a career or a relationship or a creative project or a vision for a life they can feel but cannot seem to reach, no matter how hard they move toward it. What he was doing wrong is what you have probably been doing wrong, and the reason neither of you could see it is the same reason a fish cannot see water. You have been so completely inside the mechanism that the mechanism itself has been invisible. Here is the open question I am going to carry through everything that follows. The thread I want you to hold while we move through all of this together. There is a specific threshold, a precise moment in the development of any human consciousness where the entire relationship between that consciousness and reality reverses, where what you have been doing to reality stops and what reality does through you begins. And that reversal is not a metaphor, it is not a spiritual concept dressed in poetic language. It is a description of a real neurological and quantum event that happens in a specific sequence for specific reasons and produces effects that are not explainable by any framework built on the assumption that you are separate from what you are trying to create. I am going to give you that sequence. I am going to show you the mechanism. But first, I need to show you what is running in its place, because you cannot install the new thing until you can see clearly what the old thing is and why it feels so right, even as it keeps producing the same results. The man in Portland, I will call him Nathan, had been trying to build a company for 11 years. Not casually, not as a side project. With the kind of focused, disciplined, unrelenting effort that people around him described as inspiring from a distance and exhausting up close. He had read everything. He had implemented everything. He had pivoted and restructured and rebuilt and refined and iterated with a precision that any outside observer would have called impressive. And the company kept almost working. It kept reaching a certain size and then plateauing. It kept attracting the right early attention and then failing to convert that attention into momentum. It kept producing moments of genuine promise, followed by periods of inexplicable stagnation. And Nathan, being the kind of person who responded to every obstacle by analyzing it more thoroughly and working harder to solve it, had spent 11 years in an increasingly sophisticated loop of observation, diagnosis, and effort that somehow never produced the breakthrough that always seemed one more adjustment away. The Tuesday afternoon in the coffee shop happened after a meeting with a potential investor that had gone, by every visible metric, extremely well. The investor had been engaged. He had asked the right questions. He had laughed at the right moments. He had leaned forward in his chair in the way that people lean forward when something is genuinely holding their interest. And then, 2 days later, he had sent a brief and polite email explaining that he had decided to pass. No specific reason, just to pass. And Nathan, sitting in the coffee shop with that email on his phone and the familiar weight of another almost settling into his chest, noticed something he had never noticed before. Not about the investor, not about the company, about himself. He noticed the quality of attention he had brought into that meeting, and the quality of attention he brought to every meeting, and to every phone call, and to every pitch and every conversation and every interaction that was supposed to be moving something forward. He noticed, for the first time in 11 years, that he had spent every one of those interactions as an observer, watching, measuring, assessing, monitoring the other person's responses, tracking whether it was going well or badly, calibrating his next move based on what he was reading. Observing and adjusting and observing and adjusting in a continuous loop that never, not once, allowed him to simply be present in the reality he was trying to create rather than outside it, watching it, managing it from a position of careful and perpetual remove. He was, he realized, the most sophisticated observer in every room he entered, and he had never once been the creator. Now I want to stay with that distinction for a moment, because it is the heart of everything, and if I move past it too quickly, it will become a concept rather than a recognition. Observer and creator are not just different roles. They are different states of consciousness that produce fundamentally different relationships to reality itself. And the difference between them is not a matter of trying harder or thinking differently or adopting a new mindset. The difference is structural. It is built into the physics of how consciousness interacts with the quantum field. And understanding it at that level, rather than at the level of motivation or psychology or personal development strategy, is what makes the shift from one to the other possible in a way that sticks rather than just inspiring a good week before the default returns. Let me give you the physics first, because the physics is what makes this real rather than rhetorical. In quantum mechanics, there is a principle that has been experimentally confirmed so many times, in so many different laboratories, with so many different variations of the underlying experiment, that it no longer functions as a theory. It functions as a description of how reality works. The principle is this: the state of a quantum system is not determined until it is observed. Before observation, the system exists in a superposition, a simultaneous inhabiting of all possible states, none of them actual, all of them potential. The act of observation, specifically the interaction of a measuring instrument or a conscious observer with the system, is what collapses that superposition into a single specific actuality. Before you look, everything is possible. The moment you look, one thing becomes real, and all the other possibilities cease to be available for that interaction. This is called wave function collapse, and it is one of the most rigorously confirmed results in the history of science. But here is the thing that almost nobody follows all the way to its logical conclusion. If the act of observation is what collapses potential into reality, then the nature of the observer is what determines which potential gets collapsed. A different observer, configured differently, brings a different measurement to the system and collapses a different reality. The observer is not neutral. The observer is not a passive recorder of what was already there. The observer is a participant in the determination of what becomes real. And the specific way the observer is configured, the frequency of their attention, the depth of their presence, the emotional and cognitive structure they bring to the act of looking, shapes what the infinite field of potential collapses into. Now here is where this becomes uncomfortable and important at the same time. There are two very different ways a consciousness can be in the observer position. The first is what I would call monitoring observation. This is the mode that Nathan was running for 11 years. It is the mode that most people in this culture run most of the time. In monitoring observation, the consciousness is watching with an agenda. It is measuring in order to assess. It is looking in order to determine whether what is happening matches what it hoped would happen. It is present, but it is present in the way a judge is present at a trial, continuously evaluating the proceeding against a predetermined standard, continuously measuring the gap between what is and what was hoped for. Monitoring observation is not passive, it is effortful. It is, in fact, one of the most energetically demanding states a consciousness can sustain. And it produces a very specific effect on the quantum field. Monitoring observation narrows the field. Because it is looking for something specific, it collapses probability in a specific and limited direction. The more tightly the monitoring observer is focused on a particular expected outcome, the more completely the infinite superposition of the quantum field gets collapsed into the narrow band of probabilities that are legible within the observer's existing framework. the field responds to the nature of the observation. Tight, agenda-driven observation produces a tight, agenda-shaped reality. And the tighter the observation, the less room there is in the collapsed reality for anything that was not already anticipated. Which means that the harder a monitoring observer works, the more efficiently they eliminate from their reality everything that the old framework could not have predicted. Every breakthrough, every synchronicity, every unexpected door, every possibility that exists just beyond the edge of what the existing model says should be possible. All of it collapses back into the field because the monitoring observer was not measuring for it, was not, in the quantum sense, configured to allow it to become real. This is Nathan's 11 years. This is the mechanism that kept producing almost but never quite. Not because he was not working hard enough, because he was working so hard, observing so carefully, monitoring so precisely, that the field had no space in which to collapse anything his framework had not already specified. He was, in the most literal sense, available to physics, creating the ceiling on his own reality through the very intensity of his observation. The second mode of observation is different in a way that sounds subtle and produces effects that are anything but subtle. I want to give this mode a name so we can talk about it precisely. I am going to call it generative presence. Generative presence is still observation, in the sense that a conscious entity is still the mechanism through which the field interacts with itself. But it is a fundamentally different quality of observation. In generative presence, the consciousness is not monitoring against a predetermined standard. It is not measuring the gap between what is and what was hoped for. It is genuinely, completely, structurally present to what is actually here without the continuous background process of evaluation and adjustment and agenda management that makes monitoring observation so exhausting and so ultimately limiting. Generative presence is the state that physicists approach when they describe the cleanest experimental conditions, the measurement that introduces the minimum possible contamination from the observer's prior expectations. It is the state that the greatest creative minds in history have described, in their own vocabularies, as the condition in which their best work arrived. Not the state they were in when they were trying hardest. The state they were in when they had somehow let go of trying and become genuinely available to what the work itself wanted to become. Mozart described hearing his compositions complete before writing them down. He was not constructing them. He was receiving them. Einstein described his most important insights arriving not during focused analytical work, but in a state of relaxed, unfocused awareness, where the mind was present but not pushing. Nikola Tesla reported seeing his inventions in complete working form before building a single component. These are not romantic myths about genius. These are descriptions of a specific state of consciousness, one in which the monitoring observer has stepped back, and something else, something that operates below and beyond the analytical mind's agenda, has stepped forward. That something else is the creator. Now, I need to be precise about what I mean by creator, because the word carries a lot of weight and a lot of confusion in the world of consciousness and manifestation. When I say creator, I am not talking about someone who forces outcomes into being through the strength of their intention. I am not talking about a consciousness that imposes its will on the quantum field and bends reality to its desires. That is just monitoring observation with more confidence. It produces the same narrowing effect, just with more force behind it. What I mean by creator is something that requires a complete reversal of the relationship between consciousness and reality. The creator is not someone who acts on reality from outside it. The creator is a consciousness that has become so completely present within reality that the boundary between the consciousness and what it is creating dissolves. Not metaphorically, structurally, at the level of the quantum interaction between observer and field. Here is the most important thing I am going to say in this entire video, and I want you to hold it carefully because it is the key that unlocks everything else. The creator does not observe reality in order to change it. The creator becomes reality in order to express it. The shift from observer to creator is not a shift in strategy or effort or focus. It is a shift in the fundamental relationship between the consciousness and the field it is interacting with. The observer stands outside the field and measures it. The creator enters the field and becomes part of what the field is generating. And when consciousness enters the field in that way, when it stops measuring from outside and starts participating from inside, the field stops responding to the limited collapse function of a monitoring observer and starts responding to something vastly larger, the creative intelligence of the field itself, moving through a consciousness that is no longer blocking it with the narrow agenda of what it expected to happen. This is what Nathan understood on the Tuesday afternoon in the coffee shop, though he would not have put it in these terms. What he understood was simpler and more devastating than any framework could fully capture. He understood that he had spent 11 years watching his own life instead of living it. He had been so focused on observing whether it was going well, measuring whether the outcomes matched his hopes, monitoring whether people were responding the way he needed them to respond, that he had never once fully arrived in the room he was standing in, had never once allowed himself to be genuinely present in a conversation without simultaneously running the background process of assessment and adjustment and agenda management, had never once stopped being the observer long enough to become something else. Something he did not yet have a word for but could feel in the coffee shop on that Tuesday afternoon was what he had been missing for 11 years. He went to his next meeting differently, not with a new strategy, not with better preparation or more refined messaging or a cleaner pitch deck. He went with a genuine and deliberate decision to put down the monitoring function entirely and simply be present, to enter the conversation without the background process running, to allow himself to be actually in the room rather than watching himself be in the room, to stop measuring whether it was going well and simply let whatever it was going to be. The meeting lasted 3 hours. It was not supposed to last more than 45 minutes. Something happened in the room that had not happened in 11 years of meetings, something that Nathan could feel but not entirely explain. The conversation stopped being a transaction and became a genuine exchange. The other person stopped being an object to be persuaded and became a real presence, someone Nathan was actually interested in, actually curious about, actually engaged with in a way that had nothing to do with whether the outcome was going to be favorable. And in that genuine engagement, in that room where the monitoring observer had finally stood down, something the field had not been able to collapse into reality for 11 years became real in the span of a single afternoon. He got the investment, not because he performed better, because he stopped performing entirely. Now I want to take you into the mechanism of this transition in a way that is practical enough to actually use, because what I have described so far is the what and the why, and both of those matter enormously, but neither of them is sufficient without the how. And the how is both simpler and more demanding than anything the monitoring observer will be comfortable hearing. The transition from observer to creator begins with a recognition, and the recognition is this: the part of you that is always watching, always measuring, always assessing whether what is happening is good enough or moving in the right direction is not your consciousness. It is a function your consciousness is performing, and like any function, it can be suspended, not permanently, not in contexts where it serves a genuine purpose, but deliberately in the specific contexts where it has been preventing the very thing you are most trying to create. The monitoring function is a tool. The problem is that most people have identified with it so completely that they experience it as the self rather than as a function of the self. They believe that if they stop monitoring, they will lose control, they will make mistakes, they will miss something important, they will become vulnerable in a way that the monitoring observer, by constantly assessing and adjusting, protects them from. What they do not see, what Nathan could not see for 11 years, is that the monitoring function is not protecting them from vulnerability. It is protecting them from full presence. And full presence is the only condition in which the creator in them can operate. You cannot create from the observer position. You can only produce, which is a very different thing. Production is the execution of what the monitoring observer has determined is possible within the existing framework. Creation is the arrival of what the field can generate through a consciousness that has made itself genuinely available to something beyond the framework. And the framework, however sophisticated, is always a subset of what is possible, always smaller than the field. always producing a ceiling that the creator in you knows, at some level below the monitoring observer's noise, is not the actual limit of what can be real. The practice of suspending the monitoring function requires something that feels, initially, like falling, like stepping off solid ground into space, because the monitoring function creates the illusion of control, and removing it, even briefly, reveals that the control it provided was never real. The investor was not persuaded by Nathan's careful calibration of every word and gesture. The outcome was never determined by how precisely he managed his own presentation. The outcomes in your life, the real ones, the ones that changed something, were never the product of perfect observation and perfect adjustment. They were the product of moments when something in you stopped calculating and simply showed up. Here is what the suspension actually looks like in practice. Because without this, it remains abstract, and abstract does not help you. The suspension of the monitoring function is not relaxation in the passive sense. It is not checking out or becoming less engaged. It is the opposite of less engaged. It is a shift from engagement as observation to engagement as participation. The difference is felt more easily than described. When you are observing, there is a gap between you and what you are in. A slight but consistent distance from the experience itself, as if you are watching it happen rather than inhabiting it. That gap is the monitoring function running. When you are genuinely present, when the monitoring function is suspended, that gap closes. Not because you have willed it to close, but because the process of assessment and measurement has paused. And without that process creating the distance, consciousness naturally collapses into full presence, into full contact with whatever is actually here. You have felt this. You know exactly what I am describing. You have been in conversations where you were so genuinely interested in the other person that you forgot entirely to monitor whether you were saying the right things, and those were the conversations that went somewhere real. You have been in creative work where you lost track of time entirely because the work had somehow started moving on its own, and what came out of those sessions was unlike anything you could have produced through deliberate construction. You have been in moments of physical experience, sport or movement or music or any embodied activity where the analytical mind went quiet and the body simply did what it knew how to do without commentary, and in those moments you performed at levels that monitoring and correcting never achieved. These are not exceptions to how consciousness works. These are the clearest available demonstrations of what consciousness is capable of when the monitoring observer steps back and the creator steps forward. The question is how to access that state intentionally rather than only occasionally and accidentally. And here is where I need to give you the single most counterintuitive piece of this entire framework. The one that the monitoring observer will resist most strongly because it directly threatens its sense of indispensability. The access point to the creator state is not effort. It is not a more disciplined practice or a more rigorous technique or a more determined decision to be more present. All of those are, in their own way, just more monitoring, more observation of whether you are doing it right, more assessment of whether you have achieved the desired state. The access point is relinquishment, the deliberate, conscious, chosen act of setting down the measurement function in a specific context and allowing yourself to not know how it is going to go. Not knowing is the door. Genuine uncertainty, held without the scramble to resolve it into something the monitoring observer can manage, is the condition in which the creator state becomes available. Because the creator does not need to know how it is going to go. The creator is not managing the outcome. The creator is participating in the process. And the process, when a consciousness is genuinely participating rather than externally monitoring, has an intelligence of its own that the monitoring observer, precisely because it is always outside looking in, can never access. This is what the quantum field is. Not a force to be manipulated, not a probability distribution to be nudged through focused intention. It is the living intelligence of reality itself, and it is always and already moving toward the highest available expression of whatever the present moment contains. The monitoring observer cannot access that intelligence because it is too busy assessing whether the moment matches expectations to actually be in the moment. The creator can access it because the creator has entered the moment fully, surrendered the distance of observation, and made themselves available to be moved by what the intelligence of the field is already moving toward. I want to bring you back to Nathan one more time because his story does not end in the coffee shop, and it does not end with the investment. What happened after that afternoon is the part that I think matters most because it shows what this shift actually produces over time rather than just in a single high-stakes moment. In the months that followed, Nathan described something that surprised him more than the investment had surprised him. He described a change in how his days felt, not in what was happening in them, though that was changing too, in the quality of the experience of being in them. The exhaustion that had been his baseline for 11 years, the weight of continuous monitoring and adjustment and assessment began to lift, not because things got easier in the objective sense, but because the energy that had been going into the monitoring function became available for something else, for genuine curiosity, for actual presence, for the experience of being interested in what was happening rather than anxious about whether it was going well. He started noticing things he had not noticed before. Not because they had not been there before, because the monitoring observer, in its focused attention on the metrics it had decided mattered, had been filtering them out. Opportunities that did not fit the framework he had been optimizing for. People whose value to his work existed in directions he had not thought to look. Approaches to problems that the monitoring observer would have dismissed because they did not match the strategy it was managing toward. The field had been offering these things the whole time. The monitoring observer had been collapsing them back into potential by simply never measuring for them. When the creator state opened up, when the monitoring observer stood back and genuine presence moved forward, the field started delivering to a consciousness that was finally configured to receive what it had been generating all along. There is a question underneath everything I have shared in this video, and it is the question that determines whether this becomes a transformation or just another interesting idea. The question is not whether you understand the difference between the observer and the creator. You understand it. The question is whether you are willing to feel the specific fear that comes with setting down the monitoring function in something that actually matters to you. Because the monitoring function does not feel like a limitation from the inside. It feels like responsibility. It feels like the reasonable, necessary, mature response to a world that does not always cooperate with what you want from it. Setting it down feels like irresponsibility, like naivety, like the kind of soft, undefended openness that only people who have not been hurt enough can afford. What I am telling you is that the monitoring function, the one that feels like protection, is the primary mechanism by which you have been keeping yourself from the life you can feel is available but cannot quite reach. And the creator state, the one that feels like risk, is the mechanism by which that life actually becomes real. Not because you deserve it more when you are present. Not because the universe rewards vulnerability. Because the field can only deliver to a consciousness that is configured to receive. And the monitoring observer, by its very nature, is never fully open. It is always measuring. And a measuring consciousness is always, in the quantum sense, narrowing the field to what it already expected to find. Stop measuring. Start inhabiting. Stop watching your life to see if it is going well, and start being in it so completely that the question becomes irrelevant. This is not a motivational instruction. This is a description of the specific structural shift that moves a human consciousness from the observer position to the creator position, from the outside of the field to the inside of it, from production within a predetermined framework to creation from within the living intelligence of what reality is actually capable of generating through you. The moment you make that shift, nothing about your circumstances will have changed, but the consciousness encountering those circumstances will be different. And a different consciousness, as the quantum field has been patiently demonstrating for over a century of experimental confirmation, collapses a different reality. Every single time, without exception. The field is not waiting for you to earn this. It is waiting for you to arrive.